My name is Jeff Williams, the Director of Alumni Engagement at the Smith School of Business. This is our second installment in our new series of professional development webinars brought to you by the Office of Alumni Relations at the Smith School of Business. Through these quarterly sessions, we hope to provide thought-provoking and valuable content that will help alumni like you achieve your personal and professional goals. Topics include influence at work, the science of getting what you want, planning for retirement, and today's topic, getting to like, how to build a future-proof brand. During the webinar today, we encourage you to use the chat box to share any questions or comments you might have for our presenter. Please feel free to submit questions throughout the session, and our presenter will ask them as often as possible. And who is our presenter? I'm pleased to introduce Jeremy Goldman. For over 15 years, Jeremy has been working with companies looking to embrace the future before their competitors do. Under Jeremy's leadership, Keels won the 2009 Web Award for Outstanding Achievement in Web Development, achieved a top 25 ranking in the L2 Digital IQ Index in the beauty and skincare category, and received a top 50 Facebook IQ ranking amongst all luxury brands. He has also managed partnerships with Beyonce's Dairy Online for Temp2 and founded Unilever's first ever luxury division. Jeremy's first book, Going Social, excite customers, generate buzz, and energize your brand with the power of social media, was the #1 best-selling social media book in the world. His latest book, Getting to Like, How to Boost Your Personal and Professional Brand to Expand Opportunities, Grow Your Business, and Achieve Financial Success, came out earlier this year. He is presently the founder and CEO at Firebrand Group, the award-winning future-proofing firm. In his spare time, which isn't much, he writes for Inc. Jeremy is a Terp, a proud Terp. He earned his MBA in Information Systems and Marketing at the University of Maryland's Robert H. Smith School of Business, and his views have been featured in publications such as Mashable, Wall Street Journal, Smart Money, Read, Write, Web, The Next Web, The Star Ledger, and Internet Retailer Magazine, and his campaigns have been featured in Gawker and Ads of the World. Jeremy, I will now turn things over to you.
Thank you very much. Let me just make sure, sorry about that. I think everybody should be able to hear me, Jeff. Let me know if I'm doing anything wrong. It's great to be with y'all, and I'm really happy, especially to have so many Terps in the same place, because I know that that does not happen all that often to me. So thank you guys for taking a little bit of time out of your day. I want to also quickly mention that I want to make sure that this is going to be very useful to everybody here. I will take it especially personally if this is not useful to any one of you guys who are attending. So what I want to do is make this very interactive, and you can use the chat function to just shoot me some questions during the entire session, and I'm going to try to integrate answers to everybody's questions within the scope of the session. So you don't have to wait until the end or anything if you have something that you want to jump in on. You know, that to me is really important to be able to make this as interactive as possible. So that being said, let me just kind of move on and say just a little bit about me. Yes, got my MBA class of 2006, and I miss Maryland whenever I'm away from it, but I'm in New York. We started Firebrand in 2012, and as we mentioned, Unilever and L'Oreal are big parts of my past. Another big part of my present is no sleep because of the 5 pets and the 2 kids, including one that is 3 months old. Getting to Like, my new book, actually really focuses on future-proofing your career by creating a strong personal brand for yourself. So, excuse me. So, I will say, even keeping politics as much as possible out of this, that we had a election last week. I don't know if you guys noticed, but if anything, that really further instilled in all of us the power of a personal brand because in a lot of ways that was a big deciding factor, is you create a strong presence for yourself and people will follow, and you might not even necessarily know where that's going to lead. So I think in a lot of ways for us, we want to talk about the importance of being future-proof in your career and how important that is, and really like a few areas that I think that for a lot of professionals are very valuable to work on your future-proofing are LinkedIn and Twitter in particular. Obviously, there are going to be some people gravitate to other platforms, but we don't have all day. That would be awesome if we did. A few general digital tips towards future-proofing yourself, and then also building your brand in real life, because that's incredibly important, and sometimes people fall back too much on technology. I prefer to focus on what actually works. So just to kind of quickly talk about the importance of being future-proof in general, okay? By 2020, you've got over 40% of the entire workforce are going to be free agents in one way, shape, or form, which means it's a lot more important to differentiate yourself. There are so many other people out there who are competing for the same roles, whether or not they're in-house or not, right? You've got 80% of large corporations who are hoping to increase their usage of permanent freelancers and are planning to do so. So that's freelancers, it's consultants, it's agencies, and that's going to be a huge impact on the workforce as well. If you look at the overall trajectory, you'll see that there was a jump of 29% between 2009 and 2012 for temp employees. That number continues to rise. This has nothing to do, actually. What's interesting is whether or not it's blue collar or white collar, but this type of migration to a new type of work is moving regardless. It's basically ticking up across all sectors. And there was actually a recent NAICS study that showed that I believe it was over 90% of the industries that they surveyed were moving in this direction. Now, globalization also makes personal branding more important because there are more potential connections and there's more digital footprints basically for all of us. So as we try to build a brand for ourselves and get better known, there's a lot of value in getting that right because it's visible to more and more individuals. So in terms of LinkedIn, that's actually one thing that I encourage you guys definitely to ask questions as we go through because LinkedIn is, for the most part, the most valuable platform for you to be building a future-proof brand when we're talking professionally, right? So here are some numbers in terms of the penetration of LinkedIn to show that even if you work outside the states and do a lot of work outside of the country, there are a lot of members on LinkedIn that can be good connections for your business. A decent percentage of them are in the U.S. These numbers continually grow, so I've got to always adjust my statistics here. Now, I think there are a lot of things with LinkedIn where we don't necessarily make the time in our schedules to do a good job and to actually show people who we are. Now, a perfect example that I want to show you is the newsfeed. This is my actual newsfeed. And this is Cameron Harold, who's a really great CEO coach. He actually wrote an article, or shared an article here, and as a result, I commented on it. I wound up connecting with Cameron, who then put me in touch with somebody who then became a client for Firebrand. And then I interviewed Cameron, and then I created I write for Inc., and in addition to my books and other journalistic pursuits, and because I like to not sleep ever. And basically, Cameron wound up being a great resource for an article and wound up actually building that relationship. And part of being future-proof is to actually anticipate the fact that these relationships will matter down the line. It's not about looking at every relationship very transactionally, but if you just hit like, and this is why I call the last book Getting to Like, not facetiously or as a joke, but like is the starting point. That's the place where you actually begin, but in reality you have to go past there. So if you just hit like on everybody's posts on social media, that's putting in the minimum amount of effort. If you comment, if you share, if you do things that require more effort, then generally you get more value out of that relationship. Now, another key thing that I think you can get a lot of value out of is to establish yourself as a thought leader on LinkedIn by actually writing articles on LinkedIn Pulse. So just to show you, incredibly easy to, instead of starting a short form status, you can start an article, and if you get an idea for an article, you don't necessarily have to post it. I have entrepreneurship lessons from my father over here, and that's something that I didn't have a chance to post ahead of Father's Day this year. So great, now I've got something that I have a portion of a post that's ready for next year. And being able to establish your expertise and really hone in on what you want to be known for is another strong way of making yourself future-proof. It doesn't matter the fact that not everybody's going to see these posts, right? Core constituents within your audience will, and that's really what you have to be aiming for. You have to be focused on essentially quality of connections, and quality of the relationships that you're building as opposed to just the quantity, because LinkedIn is not about just connecting with as many people as possible. So another thing is obviously LinkedIn groups, which are somewhat deprecated now. LinkedIn's not really pushing them nearly as much as they used to, but if you want to build relationships in a few groups, again, if you look at some of these over here on the right-hand side, some of them have more conversations than others. And what we found through our research, and it's a natural human intuition as well, is that if you post often something promotional, but you don't actually add any value in that particular group, then nobody's going to really speak to you, and nobody's going to engage with your content. But if you build a relationship over time, then you are going to be able to get a lot of people to respond to you and to engage with things that you post. So I think that that's an important thing absolutely to note here. Now, even though groups are not as important as they used to be, seeing who's looking at your profile and looking to see how you rank for profile views is still incredibly important, and that's something that I think has a lot of value. Not enough people actually spend the time to look to see who is looking at their profile, but in some ways that lets you know who's finding you and what keywords you have to optimize for if you're not being found for the right particular keywords. You probably need to do some editing, which is actually going to tie into your profile, right? Now, when I look at my headline, generally speaking, it's a good idea to tell your audience immediately who you are and figure out what the first thing that you want to come to mind when people think about you. It's incredibly important to put in some of the keywords. In the case of my profile, I often do a lot of keynote speaking. I want to be found for that. That's something that I choose to kind of lead with in my headline. Another thing that's interesting is you'll often see people who don't update their profile that often, and their headline might have been auto-generated by LinkedIn, and sometimes it's auto-generated based off of the last time you updated your profile, which might have even been your last role. So I've seen people where I know they moved on from MTV 2 years ago, but their headline says associate producer at MTV, when in reality maybe they're an executive producer elsewhere. So make sure that you have the right keywords in there. Don't spend time, if you work at MTV, explaining what MTV is in the headline. Only explain what you have to, and understand that these are the few keywords that people are really going to be thinking about when they think about you. So likewise, the summary. There's some people who do this in first person versus third person. Generally speaking, profiles are as personal as possible, right? So we recommend to do first person and think of it as your 15-second intro. This is part of the bio of my co-author with in Getting to Like. So Ali Zagat wrote this. And one thing that's important is it focuses on the core things she wants to be known for, but it also has key breaks. You want to make sure that you don't have a giant block of text that's impenetrable to people, because that just doesn't wind up being something that resonates with folks. And we tend to read about 30% slower on browsers. That's not even factoring in mobile screens. So you really kind of have to think about your audience and not just about every word that you want to include in there. If you think of it in more of a 15-second intro, you're probably going to be in better shape. So then when you when you look at skills, LinkedIn will often prompt users to endorse their connection skills. The more endorsements you get, the more people will believe in your expertise. Now, a lot of people don't even realize that while these are auto-generated in terms of what shows up on your profile, you can manipulate this list to an extent. So you'll see business innovation. I intentionally edited my list to bring that up there because LinkedIn is more likely to ask people, do you want to recommend Jeremy for business innovation if I put it a little bit higher up on my list, right? So now, and since then, you'll see I've gotten more endorsements for that, and that was by intent. Now, there are a lot of things such as online marketing and digital marketing where you'll see that I'm doing pretty well, but those obviously overlap to a large extent. So if I was smart, I would probably move a few of these that overlap down to the bottom part of this list, and then move things that are speak more towards what I want to be known for a little bit higher up on the list. So with recommendations, they're free form, and what I always recommend to people is to try to have targeted recommendations. If you give more of these, you're going to get more. But one huge benefit to having these, and I think that this is something that cannot be understated, is that if you write them for other people, what you can do is you have the ability to then ask them for one. And if you ask them for one, you can then say, I want, recommendations in in 5 different areas. I'd love it if you spoke about my ability to do project management or my penchant for doing procurement, right? Whatever it is. And in doing so, you can actually build your brand in a certain direction because everybody who looks at your profile later is going to see that, wow, everybody recommends Jeremy for project management. I guess I should probably hire him for that. And by the way, I'm really bad at that. So that's a bad example, but you get the point. So moving on. So headshots, surprisingly, it's something that we pay a lot of attention to how we look generally in real life, and a lot of people don't pay enough attention to how they look on LinkedIn, especially because you're only going to have one chance at making that good first impression. A lot of people will post pictures that are poorly lit, or they're cutting out an ex-girlfriend out of the photo, or they originally uploaded a photo 5 years ago when the dimensions for a photo were a lot smaller, so there's a giant gray box around your head. Obviously, those are all things that I recommend staying away from as much as possible. Make sure that you've got something that looks good and conveys you in the way that you're trying to be conveyed. There are obviously a lot of LinkedIn don'ts to talk about as well, so you have to be mindful of your behavior. And if anybody, again, has questions about all these, please throw them in. In addition to being mindful about your behavior, a lot of people will want to be known for particular things, but that doesn't mean you should use keywords indiscriminately. Make sure that you're very focused and that you've got keywords that you're comfortable speaking to. If you get a meeting with somebody, you don't want to throw something in just because it's a buzzword of the day. It's also not Twitter, which where people will collect connections just for the sake of it. You've got to know what each platform is about. So LinkedIn actually becomes less valuable if you just collect people for the sake of it. And now you have to remember, how do I know different people? Which are the people you actually know? Which are the people you don't? It's better to focus on quality on LinkedIn. It's also not Tinder. There are some people who I know who've gotten bad reputations because they figured, hey, this is a great little dating app because nobody will think that that's what I'm trying to do. And word does spread, right? And be respectful about the fact that you're posting in essentially a common area, and you want to make sure that you don't tick people off. And if you do, make sure it's for the right reason. If you have a political view, for instance, that you're okay with losing business over, that's totally fine. Go ahead and post it. But you have to just understand the fact that other people are watching, right? So Twitter is actually, I think, really interesting because I know a lot of people who kind of say, oh, yeah, I want to get into Twitter. I've done it a little bit. I've dabbled, but they never fully commit. But you have actually over 100 million active users a day on Twitter, a lot of whom have relatively high value to you if you connect with them and build relationships with them. A really good chunk of millennials are on Twitter, so even if it gets acquired by another platform, I think it's relatively safe to say that it's here to stay. You've got 1 billion unique visits monthly to sites that have embedded tweets. So even if you're not on Twitter, actually you're going to be seeing Twitter in a lot of ways. So let me just see, and I think actually what we're going to do is I'm going to quickly jump into one question about LinkedIn Premium. I know that we're kind of like into Twitter already, but hey, you know, that's the nice thing about webinars. Show business folks, we can kind of jump around. One thing I want to talk about with LinkedIn Premium, and I don't think I have a slide that really speaks to that, so I'll just kind of stay here for a second. And I see here that the questions are coming into the question box as opposed to the chat, so that's awesome. Now I know kind of where to look. Thanks for that, Jeff. Much appreciated. There are a lot of questions about LinkedIn, particularly with LinkedIn Premium, that I just want to address. You do get a lot of these in-mail credits, which is generally valuable. And if you're doing a lot of searches on LinkedIn and you're trying to connect with people, that is, generally speaking, I think a pretty good use of LinkedIn. Again, with LinkedIn Premium, there are a few different levels, and depending on what you're using it for, I definitely recommend trying it out, trialing it, and seeing whether or not you have a good return on investment there. That's the kind of thing that I think, you know, for everybody, depending on their business, they have to make a decision themselves, you know, trying it for a month or two and then seeing. I know for us, for instance, because we do so much searching on LinkedIn, it is very valuable to have a premium membership where you can filter by a few things that you wouldn't otherwise be able to filter by, you know. I think Alan had a really good point about connections, and if I can just kind of share Alan's point, he was saying about linking with professionals across all industry. It's all about the strength of weak connections. And you know, he shared a really interesting piece about this, which I haven't read. And I think the point of you know, that I bring up about weak connections, I actually think it's a good idea to use LinkedIn to prospect, to find new people to speak to. I'm really referring to people who kind of connect with 17 new people that never actually speak to them again. I often get LinkedIn requests that I say, why the heck not? Let me go accept them. And I've run a few tests where I wrote to 17 people who had written me out of the blue, who I connected with all of them, sent them the same note and said, hey, what you know, made you connect with me? And I had 2 of the 17 write back to me. So it's not even a weak connection if somebody tries to connect with you and then actually never has a conversation with you. That's a non-existent one. So I think that it all really depends on how you define a weak connection. I think that is friend the best way to connect to those you want to connect, even if you don't know them personally? Very good question from Peter. Generally speaking, the more connections you've got in common with people, they'll often just connect with you through LinkedIn because they'll say, this person seems relatively safe, and then you can shoot them a note afterwards. So I think that it's a case-by-case basis. Generally speaking, what I found, frankly, is that if you can connect with people over email, and obviously it's not that hard to find people's email addresses, I'll try to kind of do things like that, and then afterwards, once I've made the connection, then I can add them on LinkedIn. But generally, now when you get a connection on LinkedIn, you're not going to necessarily be able to say, hey, I found you through so-and-so, it would be great to connect. Depending on what app you're using for LinkedIn, from the mobile or browser or tablet, some of them will allow you to write, here's how I know you, or here's you know, like why I'd like to get to know you, and some platforms don't necessarily let you do that. So LinkedIn's kind of inconsistent in that regard. So moving on to Twitter, I just kind of buzzed through a whole bunch of questions right there. But for writing bios in general. So being straightforward and honest in defining yourself and adding some wit, but not coming across like a poser, is actually really beneficial for figuring out the best way to portray yourself on Twitter. There's actually been some studies that portraying yourself as upbeat and optimistic leads to more connections, which I think makes perfect sense because we tend to want to gravitate towards other people who are peppy and fun to be around as opposed to the opposite, right? And including something about one of your personal interests that's almost incongruous with everything else that you've told people about yourself is important. That's why I always tell people, the fact that I've got 5 pets, even though I live in Manhattan, or that I've got a teddy bear iPhone case that always matches my outfit because I've got 13 cases that are just different colors. To have one or two weird things about you that are somewhat incongruous makes you feel like more of a fleshed out human being, and I think that ultimately that's why you're on Twitter. You want to be connecting with other human beings and not just brands, right? Now, this is something from our partners at Simply Measured where they were saying, and I think that this is true, hashtags are valuable, but don't overdo them. Don't use hashtags that nobody else is using. Don't throw 15 in there just to throw 15 in there. And look to see what your peers are doing, and you'll find the best way to really represent yourself. Everybody wants to get a ton of followers. I have a decent number of followers, but I know people who got a lot more than I do, and I think that the key thing here is not only to be patient, but also set reasonable goals for yourself. If you can get 60 of the right people following you, it's a whole lot better than 600 of the wrong people. There are a lot of ways to fake your following. I mean, shoot me a note afterwards. I can show you particular large accounts that they have a decent number of fake followers. But you know what? People see through that. If you engage meaningfully with others, then you're going to build strong relationships. Importing your address book already helps. You build up your list because you might find that there are a few people you didn't even realize that you know that are active on Twitter. And I think that if you follow relevant and interesting users, it tends to lead to other people who are following them where you can kind of have mutual conversations that you can jump into. So Twitter chats are actually a huge way to brand, let's go back, to brand yourself. So I highly recommend those whenever you can. Essentially, if you haven't participated in a Twitter chat before, there are virtual events housed on Twitter and organized around one particular hashtag. They generally have a set schedule. There are lists online, and if anybody follows up with me afterwards, I can show you. But there are lists online where you can find Twitter chats that are running all different times of the week. And you can find a few where there are ardent, hardcore supporters of a particular topic that you can get involved with, right? And that's incredibly useful. Now, another thing that I find really useful is, let's say if I'm trying to connect with IBM, you can use Twitter's advanced search to do, nifty things like find me accounts that mention IBM that are near Manhattan and within a 15-mile radius. So there are all these different nifty tricks if you go to Twitter's advanced search. Generally, that's in the top right-hand corner of your interface if you're in a browser. Now, I was talking about Twitter chats, but I find that chats are actually really great to help me develop lists where I can find people who are really interested in a particular topic. I went to Web Summit in 2016 just now, but here you see in 2015 I made a few connections that I wanted to connect back again with next year. So I made a Twitter list, which is a basic functionality of Twitter, incredibly easy to use and very valuable ultimately. Now, just to take a look, this is, for instance, my inner polygon list, right, where I've got a few people who are really smart. I want to stay on top of everything that they're always saying. And what I'll kind of do is build myself a little bit of a schedule. So I have a finite amount of time that I'm allowed to spend on Twitter on any given day. Unfortunately, I'd love to spend more, but there's like no time for anything. And, I'll give myself, and this is just a sample schedule, you can have a main list, like my inner polygon list that I use, and say I'm going to engage with it for 10 minutes twice a day. And then you can say I'm going to spend 15 minutes on all of my other lists combined. It's a great way to kind of keep yourself organized and to structure your interactions. And I think that given how busy a lot of us are, we really need to have a little bit more of a structure when we're marketing ourselves and when we're getting the word out about everything that we're doing. So when we're talking about kind of everything else digital, because I think that obviously it's a little bit difficult to say we're going to focus on everything in the entire world in a very short session, but I will tell you that Facebook groups get really high engagement, and as I'm sure you know, if you're in any groups, you tend to get decent number of notifications just by virtue of being in a group. When somebody posts in the group, or when a friend of a friend posts in the group, that winds up being very beneficial because everybody else gets a notification. And it then winds up forcing more and more engagement there. So just like with LinkedIn groups, with exception of the fact that Facebook groups are actually picking up steam, I would definitely recommend building a relationship with a group, not just posting something and running away. A lot of people do that. It's lazy. We're all guilty of it. It's happened. But it doesn't yield a good return, so you might as well actually force yourself to engage as much as possible. Let me just see what, I don't know what you guys do with optimizing your schedule on social media. And this actually changes all the time, I should say. But timing winds up being really important because often people will figure out what works for them, but they won't necessarily think about their audience to the same extent. So I put down here some best engagement rates, for instance, early morning, after work, or late night. But times that are going to work for your industry and the connections that you're trying to reach out to will vary. Obviously, for instance, if you're working with people overseas, that's going to be a huge factor here. Your posts need to come when the audience is most likely to have your brand or subject matter in mind. So keep that in mind when you're working on whatever you're working on. It's not really about you, but it is about your audience, when they're online, and when they're going to be thinking about your product. And then when we're talking about encouraging engagement, asking your audience a question and framing things in one way versus another, believe it or not, actually can yield engagement rate differences of 30 to 40%. So you can say the same thing in a slightly different way, change a few words, and all of a sudden people respond to it very, very differently. So that's something I definitely recommend, is if you're trying to get engagement online, which is always an uphill battle, so don't feel bad if you're not always successful, but if you can make some small modifications to your process, you can actually do really well with that. And then positioning, where or when or would at the end of a post brings 15% more engagement. Why questions make people think a little bit too hard, and as a result, you might get some engagement there, but it's just harder to get as much as you would get otherwise. Sorry, stuck. And then, and I know I'm kind of going a little bit quickly on here, so if anybody has any questions about the last two sections, by all means, we can kind of get to them in a second. This is one thing that I want to kind of harp on for a second, is building your brand in real life, as I call it. It's something that a lot of people have really kind of leaned into over the last few years because social media has inspired them to do more with their offline brand. And in a lot of ways, it's a great way to future-proof yourself, is to build these strong connections with people face-to-face, right? The problem is that there are a lot of people who are so happy about the fact that we've got automation with email and social media so efficient, and when it's 7 of your friend's birthday on Facebook, you can cut and paste happy birthday to 7 people in a row and think you're so clever because you added like a little cat gif, but everybody gets the same exact cat gif. That's something that I don't want to say is lazy, but it's lazy, right? I mean, we all do it sometimes, but it's much better to go beyond, and that's why the people who are still successful at future-proofing themselves understand that there's an offline component that they have to speak to. So just wanted to say that, right? The network, I think I've kind of just said a few of these things right now, but a network is a powerful asset, right? And your physical presentation, I think, is really important. It has to reinforce your digital brand. So, for instance, one of the key things that people know about me is that I can be a little bit quirky, but I take work very seriously. So I don't dress like a clown, but I do try to dress in a way that lets people know that I'm not like the guy that they had their last meeting with, right? Um, Also, the thing that's interesting, and I think that this is particularly poignant given the election, is that you don't really know who you're going to be encountering when you go out to a conference or an alumni event. You're exposed to new modes of thinking in the way that you're not necessarily going to be exposed to in the echo chamber that is social media, where everybody posts after the election and everybody in their network seems to agree with them, right? Because we've kind of quarantined ourselves almost into these different little segments. So finding people who are like-minded with you, who you mesh with, is key. And I think that that's why IRL matters to a large extent, and always will, frankly, until we find a way that technology can pretty much 100% mimic the physiological response that we get when we see somebody in real life, when we actually truly connect with somebody. Now, I just want to point out a few things that I think are really interesting about those in real-life connections, because they're just going to be things that I want to say that everybody knows, and at the same time, everybody gets wrong to some extent. So just to kind of give you an example here, a lot of people say, well, I had a meeting with a guy, and, like it was a good hour. It was a good chance to make a first impression. I think we had a good meeting. But really, the true first impression is really within the first 7 seconds. I've had interviews where I sit down with somebody, and I know, you try to get the bias out of your head, but after a few seconds, I immediately have a sense as to whether or not I'm going to be working with this person, whether or not they're going to be hired. And you try to shake that out of your head, but you're not necessarily going to be able to. And by the way, I know that there are 1 or 2 questions that we got from Joe and Jonathan. I'm going to come back to those right after the IRL section. So as people have a few more, by all means throw them in. And Joe and Jonathan, thanks for those. Those are really good ones, actually. And I'm not just saying that. So, cute baby. This is not my baby, I wish. Mine's pretty cute too, but smiles are infectious. There's a lot of research out there that indicates that if you can actually have the right kind of smile when you meet somebody, particularly in the first few seconds, but even if it's not you to necessarily be a smiley person, that's fine, but you have to accept the fact that you're paying a price then, that you're going to get less deals done, that you're going to be less likely to really future-proof yourself because you're not going to be building the strongest possible relationships with people. Now, strong handshakes, interestingly enough, there's a lot of research about women and salary, and one thing that we've actually found is that there's a little bit of data that women, the preferred handshake to a woman and from a woman is actually different than to a man from a man, right? Men are not as concerned as shaking too vigorously as women are. Women obviously are concerned about shaking too lightly, but also concerned about shaking too vigorously. So you do want to err on the side of not aggression, that's way too much, but you want to accept the fact that it's probably better to err on more pressure, and while you're actually doing that handshake, eye contact, not too little and not too much so that you wind up coming across like a creep. Those are actually really beneficial tricks to creating a strong first relationship with people. And then again, these are things that I think we all know. I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but I am telling you something that I believe most of the people on the call can probably appreciate and probably don't do all the time. Speaking clearly is incredibly important to make sure that you're actually introducing yourself rather than assuming that people know certain things about you, and not even waiting until they ask for that introduction, but to make sure that you're providing information as much as people want that. So Repeating your contact's name so that you remember it is another key point that I think a lot of people will remember somebody's face and say, who was that? That was, they work with Rachel, right? I mean, and you just have to do some research later to figure out their name. It's a lot easier to repeat your contact's name and to repeat information and then drop it into an Evernote file or some other type of structure that will help you remember. And obviously dress for success as much as possible. Now, one of the last things before I get to those other questions is networking events and conferences. So in-person interactions, it can definitely help your business. I recommend putting together a plan well in advance that's tailored to your specific objectives, and then figuring out a formula for speaking versus attending. You obviously want to establish yourself to an extent as a thought leader, but also I've seen people who all they do is speak at conferences. They never really have the chance to sit with people at conferences and learn. So I recommend blocking off parts of your calendar in order to do that. If you look on Firebrand Group's site, we actually have 2 different articles that have done really well, which is the top marketing analytics conferences of the past year and top social media conferences of the past year. And we're going to be updating that for 2017 so people can take a look at in case they work in a field that's somewhat similar to mine. If you're interested, this doesn't apply to everybody. If you're looking to find and speak at conferences, Lanyard is a really good tool. Calls for speakers, Googling that search along with a particular city or industry, and figuring out how you're going to stand out from somebody else. We didn't talk too much about this, but identifying a niche where you can be the best. If you happen to be a CPA who is based in, northern Connecticut, I would rather you be known as the top business valuation focused CPA, right? Just to take an example. You have to make sure as much as possible that you hone in on one particular message that nobody else is telling, because I want you to figure out how you can be number one at something, and we can all do it. But really to future-proof yourself is to accept the fact that everything is getting nichified now, for lack of a better term, and you really have to make sure that you are the best at what you do. Now there's obviously a lot of value with intimate settings such as one-on-ones. Look for meetups that are near you if you're looking for things that are a little bit smaller, but also making sure that you're blocking out X percentage of your schedule for coffees. A lot of people say, oh yeah, I kind of, I've had 50 coffees in the last year or 10 coffees, whatever it is. Doesn't matter. It's great, but it doesn't matter if you've done them if you don't have a system in place to ensure that you're going to keep doing things like that. So I really recommend to build out a calendar as much as possible, and if you protect some time, such as Friday afternoons or all the time, like 3 hours around lunchtime every day, if you break it up and put it into your calendar, it's more likely to happen. So this is my thank you, but since I'm far from done, I want to actually go backwards and answer 1 or 2 questions. So Joe is actually asking if LinkedIn or Twitter collect any data on participation on these platforms by industry. It's a really good question. It does, and I know that his question was a little bit more involved. I think that one of the key things that I think it does make sense on platforms like LinkedIn is you do have the ability to actually go in and see how much time people from different, I'm just kind of going back to a relevant slide. This is the closest thing possible. But when you're talking about different industries, one of the things I definitely recommend is to study your particular industry. You can look to see people who you're connected to who mention, let's say if you're in the energy field, you can look for energy and look for all your first-degree connections and see, are they actually engaging often? Are they posting statuses on LinkedIn, or are they not? Do they have very few connections, which is often a sign that their profile has gone by the wayside and they're not spending time on it? Or is their headshot too small? That's another sign that LinkedIn is not that active in your industry. That being said, these are pretty massive platforms, and it's kind of like, we've had people come to us asking us, does Facebook work for my industry? Well, the short answer is yes, and the same thing's true with LinkedIn. It's just a question of how well it's going to work. But these are massive platforms at this point, so even if LinkedIn doesn't have 100% penetration in your niche that you're looking to wind up in, it still has a ton of interaction overall. So I think that was a really good question, which I think in some way ties into the thing that Jonathan was asking, that I mentioned changing the way a question's framed can change engagement by 30%. Do I have an example of how to slightly change a question's framing? So I really like that because I think that touches on the most important aspect of social media, which is that it's social, right? It's all about what's going to work for your audience and what's going to elicit some type of response, right? So I've seen, to answer Jonathan's question, I've seen people on social where they want to get a lot of engagement on a post, and then they ask me, I'm really surprised I got no engagement. What the heck did I do wrong? And believe it or not, you'll see things where they didn't even ask a question. Like they'll have a rambling status update where they just hope that people engage, but they don't really know necessarily what's the best way to frame it. And I actually recommend making sure at the very least it's a question and that it's not a why question, right? To ask even something and to play around with the framing of it, and I know that this is not a perfect answer, but I think that it is valuable to understand that you can change a few words and turn something that's not even a question into a question. If you wanted to know, and just to take a specific example, if you wanted to find out if people think, I read an article that The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, is looking to run for president in 2020 because America, right? But anyway, if you were going to post something about that and you were going to say, we just heard that The Rock is going to run for president. This is crazy, right? You can write that and people might respond, but if you change the question to actually turn it into a question to say, do you think it's crazy that The Rock might run in 2020? Or like, when you were watching The Rock, live years ago wrestling, I don't watch wrestling, but I think he was a wrestler, right? Did you ever think that he would ever be encouraged to do a presidential bid and that he would be the more qualified candidate in 2020, right? I mean, you could put something together like that, and it would be an interesting way of handling that. Now, another thing is, I thought that Darren in the chat asked a really good question, which is separating social media versus professional social media, and do they need to be separate? And the short answer is, no, not really. They don't have to be. It is important as much as possible to understand that people want to deal with real human beings. While, you have a fishing trip and you might not want to post that on LinkedIn, you don't have to hide things away. I've seen people do things that are very old school where they've got two Facebook profiles and they link people to the professional one when they want to and the personal one when they want to. And like I said, that's very old school and that's not really the way to go. The better thing to do would be to let people in, and for business contacts who you feel you've got a personal relationship with, add them on Facebook as well. Treat Facebook as something that you can post most everything on, and LinkedIn is something that should be a little bit more directed. The other thing that I would add to that, which I think is really important, is all of these platforms have filtration devices. They have privacy settings. The vast majority, and this has been backed up by all studies, the vast majority of people actually don't use the privacy settings. They don't put people into groups on Facebook, but I'll have posts on Facebook that are public because I don't care if anybody else sees them. I'll have things that only go up to my friends. I'll even have certain things where if I want to post something where I think it's going to be interesting specifically only to people who went to business school with me, and I have a class of 2006 group, and I'll use that to post things that I don't want everybody else to see, that I want to exclude from the world. So it really doesn't take that much time to set up, these little groups that you can post only to certain people within Facebook or only certain people within LinkedIn. It's not that hard, but a lot of people don't really make the time to do it. So I would definitely recommend going that route. Let me just see. I think that might be it for the questions. Let me see if there's anything else. I'll kind of scroll through, and if anybody has a last second one, type it in quickly. But this has been, I think, a really great crowd, and I think it's such an important topic, by the way. So thank you guys so much. I want to say, if anybody's interested in learning more about the book, yada yada, getting to like.us is a great place to go check out more. And then if you want to email me, you've got my info right below here at jg@firebrandgroup.com. Yeah, I think that's probably it. So I guess I'll turn it back over to Jeff.
Great. Thank you so much, Jeremy, and thank you to all of our Terps who attended today's webinar. We'll hope you join us on February 1st for our next session, Declutter Your Work Life and Increase Productivity. A recording of today's webinar will be posted to the Smith School alumni website as well as our YouTube account, so please stay tuned for that if you'd like to rewatch anything. That's it. Have a great day and go Terps.